Prepare yourselves for the most heart-stopping twist in our ongoing tale, a daring rooftop escape that puts both human ingenuity and alien resolve to the test. Our hero, along with his newfound interstellar ally, must outsmart relentless enforcers, navigate secret hideouts scattered across the country, and unlock cryptic technologies hidden by a brilliant but eccentric grandfather. Each narrow escape, every discovery of a new artifact, tightens the grip of tension, pushing them closer to an ultimate reckoning that will decide their fates and potentially Earth's future. Will they manage to unveil the final piece of this cosmic puzzle, or is the Council's power too colossal to withstand? Stay with us to experience every surge of adrenaline and see how this extraordinary adventure concludes. If you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us share many more thrilling stories like this one. Don't miss what happens next. Jason Pierce exhaled a weary sigh as he peered at the corroded circuit breaker box embedded in the far wall of his grandfather's basement. The stale smell of dust and long-sealed cobwebs filled the air, clinging to every breath he took. His flashlight beam was the only reliable source of light, slicing through the darkness as he flipped switches on and off, hoping to coax life from the ancient wiring. "Come on," he muttered under his breath, giving a gentle tap to the metal face of the breaker. "Just give me something." Nothing but static and silence. This entire house, left to Jason by his late grandfather, the eccentric Professor Gregory Pierce, seemed determined to make every day of renovation a brand new adventure. With its secret rooms, hidden panels, and bizarre artifacts, the property felt like a riddle Jason couldn't quite solve. 3 weeks into his inheritance, and he had stumbled upon hidden drawers stuffed with cryptic notes, a locked chest containing unknown metallic fragments, and now this archaic electrical system that worked about as well as a steam engine in a jet age. He stepped back and shone the flashlight up toward the rafters, half expecting to see more secret compartments lurking overhead. Even as a child, he remembered Grandfather Gregory spinning wild yarns about ancient relics and civilizations lost to time. Back then, Jason had been more interested in comic books and soccer than in relics or old manuscripts. Now, as he was finally old enough to handle the estate, he wished he had paid more attention to his grandfather's stories. Perhaps there was a kernel of truth hidden among all that talk of hidden knowledge and cross-continental explorations. He lowered the flashlight, letting its beams skim the surface of the wall. That was when he noticed something strange. A faint circular seam carved into the concrete. It was almost imperceptible, curving in a way that looked distinctly unnatural. Heart pounding with sudden curiosity, Jason ran his fingertips along the seam. The cold concrete felt oddly hollow. "What did you stash down here, grandfather?" he asked softly, as though the long-departed professor might answer from the shadows. Jason found a hammer from his makeshift tool station. He tapped cautiously at the curved seam. A hollow echo reverberated back. Despite the flash of apprehension he felt, he couldn't resist. With a harder swing, he chipped away at the concrete, sending bits of debris scattering across the floor. The concrete crumbled more readily than he'd anticipated, leaving a gaping hole that revealed something concealed just behind the wall. The beam of his flashlight skittered across a sleek metallic surface. It was large, 8 feet tall at least, and egg-shaped, shimmering with an otherworldly reflection that made Jason's scalp prickle. "That's definitely not normal," he murmured, stepping closer. Symbols, strange shifting runes, crawled across the metallic pod's surface, glowing dimly as if triggered by his proximity. Jason felt a tingling in his fingertips, a subtle hum in the air that made his teeth ache. This was no ordinary time capsule or archaeological find. His mind whirled with questions. His grandfather had been many things: a traveling researcher, a collector, sometimes a conspiracy theorist, if the local rumors were to be believed. But was he also hiding alien technology? Jason touched the surface of the pod, warm to the touch, like living metal. That faint hum grew sharper, and the symbols flared into a soft turquoise glow, making his heart skip a beat. Suddenly, a crisp, pressurized hiss cut through the stagnant air. A seam appeared in the metal, sliding open. Jason staggered backward, nearly toppling a toolbox. From within the pod, something stirred. Something that shouldn't exist in a basement in suburban Pennsylvania, or anywhere else on Earth for that matter. And that was the moment everything Jason thought he knew about his life began to unravel. A figure stepped, or perhaps floated, out of the pod, standing tall and impossibly graceful. Her skin glowed in a deep emerald green hue that seemed to catch the reflection of Jason's flashlight, transforming it into dancing bands of light. Long, silvery hair cascaded over her shoulders, stirring softly, though there was no breeze. Her eyes were luminous, reflecting not just the basement's faint illumination, but some inner radiance that pulsed with life. She looked directly at Jason, and in that first moment, he felt a strange resonance, like the echo of distant music reverberating through his body. She tilted her head curiously, lips parting to reveal a soft smile. "My liberator," she said, her voice laced with an accent Jason couldn't place, melodic, lilting, and undeniably otherworldly. She dropped to one knee in a gesture that reminded him of an ancient knight pledging fealty. "I am Avalon," she continued, "and I pledge my life in service to you. By releasing me, you have sealed our bond." Jason stood there, mouth open, his mind struggling to process what was happening. Only a few beats ago, he had been cursing at a circuit breaker. Now he was witnessing something straight out of science fiction. I, I'm Jason," he finally managed to stammer, stepping forward gingerly as if sudden movement might break the spell. "You can speak English?" That was the simplest of the thousand questions whirling in his mind. "Through my universal translator," Avalon explained. She stood up, her motions fluid and stately. The silvery suit she wore clung to her figure, made of the same shimmering material as her pod. "I sense you are confused. Did your predecessor not explain what I am, why I've been kept here?" "Predecessor?" Jason echoed. Then it hit him. She meant his grandfather. "You mean Professor Pierce? My grandfather passed away almost a month ago. I inherited the house. I had no clue there was something like you hidden in the basement." He stopped, swallowing hard, eyes darting up to the hole he'd made in the concrete. She'd been sealed there for who knew how long. And from the reverent way she looked at him, it was clear she believed he had rescued her on purpose. Avalon's expression flickered with uncertainty. "He must have succeeded in helping me hide from my pursuers," she said softly, more to herself than to Jason. She glanced around the basement, her gaze settling on the outdated wiring and old water heater. "How long has it been?" Jason shrugged helplessly. "He bought this place decades ago, right after I was born. But if you were here the whole time, then that's crazy." He ran a hand through his hair, still trying to recover from the shock. "Are you an alien? Sorry, you must be, right?" Avalon's lips turned up in a faint smile, tinged with sadness. "I am from a place far beyond your solar system, one of many who defied the galactic authority known as the Council. They hunted me, and I sought sanctuary. Your grandfather's generosity, or perhaps that of his allies, gave me safety in slumber. Now you have awakened me." He opened his mouth to question her further, but another noise broke the tension, the sound of footsteps above them. Jason recognized the determined tread of his next-door neighbor, Hannah Stokes, a busybody who meant well, but had a knack for showing up at the least convenient times. He froze, sharing a panicked look with Avalon. "Stay here," he hissed. I'll handle this, but you need to hide or something." Avalon glanced at the half-demolished wall, then at the softly humming pod behind her. "The stasis chamber cannot reactivate immediately," she whispered, her tone apologetic. "We must deceive this Hannah if we are to protect my existence." And with that, her skin began to shimmer. Colors rippled across her arms, her face, until that emerald hue faded to a pale, human-like complexion, though a faint glimmer of green still lingered around her eyes. Even her clothing adapted, looking less like alien armor and more like a snug-fitting turtleneck in slate gray. "I'm going to regret this," Jason mumbled, as he hurried toward the staircase, preparing for the awkward explanation that was about to ensue. He emerged into the main floor's hallway, stifling the rush of wild thoughts running circles through his mind. At the top of the basement steps stood Hannah, arms crossed, expression exasperated. She wore her usual casual jeans and a floral blouse, blonde hair tied back in a functional ponytail. "Jason?" she called, leaning over the railing to peer into the dim light below. "Your front door was open and the truck's in the driveway, but you didn't answer the bell. Everything okay?" Yeah, he replied in a forced, slightly breathless voice. I was just down there with a friend. Real smooth, Jason, he thought, real smooth. Hannah raised an eyebrow. A friend didn't know you had guests. I tried calling, but it went straight to voicemail. She cast a suspicious glance around the cluttered foyer, stacked with half-unpacked boxes. From upstairs, the gentle whir of old radiators was the only other sound. It's Dr. Evelyn Green, Jason improvised. She's helping me catalog some of the weird items grandfather left behind. You know how he was into all that historical oddities stuff. He tried not to grimace too obviously, bracing himself for more questions. As if on cue, Evelyn appeared at the top of the basement steps. In her human guise, she looked elegantly studious, with neatly brushed dark hair and a composed expression. Her deep green eyes, once glowing and inhuman, now simply appeared strikingly vivid. Hello, she offered politely, extending a hand to Hannah. I'm Dr. Green. We've been going through the professor's collection to see what might be historically significant. Hannah shook her hand, still wearing a half-frown of curiosity. Pleasure to meet you, Doctor. Didn't realize Jason was bringing in outside experts. The local Heritage Society is meeting soon to discuss the house, and I figured he might want to attend. He's got, a stake in how it's preserved. Evelyn offered a quick glance at Jason. Yes, we were just talking about that. There's a great deal of interest in some of the professor's items, and I believe any thorough assessment should be done carefully to protect the integrity of the collection. She spoke with calm authority, as if she'd been part of the academic community for years. Jason found himself marveling at her composure. Hannah shrugged. Well, I'll let you two get back to cataloging. I just wanted to make sure you knew the meeting's tonight at 7. It's in the town hall, and word on the street is they're pushing for an official inspection of your grandfather's property. If that happens, you'll have historians crawling around every corner, top to bottom. Sounds like you've got a head start, though. Jason managed a tense smile. Thanks, Hannah. I might drop by. Not sure yet. With an appraising look, Hannah headed for the front door. All right, don't be late if you do come. She paused, turning back to cast a once-over glance at Evelyn. Nice to meet you, Dr. Green. Maybe we can chat at the meeting. She left, shutting the door behind her. Jason waited for a few seconds before releasing a shaky sigh. I can't believe she bought that, he said, turning to Evelyn, who remained poised by the stairwell. A small frown formed on Evelyn's face as she looked around. We need to be cautious. If more people come here, or if an official inspection takes place, they might discover remnants of my technology. We must ensure that does not happen. Jason nodded, his pulse still racing. Right. Not exactly sure how to do that, though. The entire community knew my grandfather was eccentric, but they don't realize the extent of his secrets. That basement alone contains a stasis pod from a civilization beyond your world, Evelyn finished solemnly. And more, I suspect. I can feel traces of his energy in these walls, as if he spent considerable time weaving something protective around this property. I just don't know why. They retreated into the kitchen, where fading sunlight filtered through the half-drawn blinds, illuminating the countertops that were still scattered with unwashed dishes and half-finished meals from Jason's hectic renovation schedule. Evelyn glanced around, her curiosity piqued by mundane objects, a half-eaten slice of pizza, the battered coffee maker, like an anthropologist studying an unfamiliar culture. Jason followed her gaze, feeling a twinge of embarrassment at the mess. Clearing his throat, he opened the fridge. So, are you hungry? Do you eat normal food, or? Evelyn turned her head, regarding him with a thoughtful smile. My physiology can process many types of nutrients. However, extended camouflage drains my energy reserves, which means I need more substantial sustenance than usual. She approached, peering into the fridge over his shoulder. Perhaps we should start with something protein-rich. My body can convert most amino acids for regeneration. Jason rummaged past some leftover takeout. I'm sure I can find some eggs, maybe a piece of steak in the freezer. Sorry it's not very gourmet. No need to apologize, Evelyn replied, though her tone was tinged with amusement. Given the short notice, I'm grateful for whatever fuel I can get. She stepped back from the fridge, scanning the kitchen cabinets next. I also want to explore more of the professor's collection. He must have kept records or diaries that might reveal why he was willing to shelter me. Jason remembered the sets of notebooks he had stumbled upon just last week, pages upon pages of scrawled handwriting, arcane symbols, and references to ancient sites. He dismissed it as more of his grandfather's eccentric research, but now he wondered if those pages hid crucial information about Avalyn's predicament. "We'll check his study after you eat," he offered. He kept a locked cabinet with all sorts of personal notes. She nodded, crossing her arms in a posture that looked almost military. The set of her jaw, the focus in her emerald eyes, still faintly glowing in the kitchen's fluorescent light, gave him a jolt of realization. This wasn't just a curious visitor from another planet. She had been on the run, entombed in a basement for who knew how long, evading powerful forces. A quiet hush fell between them, underscoring the gravity of the situation. "So you said you were running from a galactic authority," Jason began, as he set a few eggs on the counter. "Are they still out there? Looking for you?" Avalyn's gaze flickered, an emotion close to fear crossing her features. "Most likely, yes. The council is vast, and they do not forgive what they consider treason. If they discover I've awakened, they'll dispatch operatives, enforcers who excel at retrieving or eliminating targets. Your world has limited technology to fight them." Jason absorbed that with a slow nod. Something about the urgency in her voice turned his blood cold. "So the more attention this house gets, the more likely they'll figure out you're here, which means that Heritage Society meeting, we might need to convince them to stay away." Avalyn tilted her head, a little grin tugging at her lips. "Yes, but from what I've gleaned of human social structures, it's never that simple. We can't simply say, 'Don't come snoop around.' We'll need a more compelling reason and a cover that explains my presence." Jason cracked the eggs into a bowl, stirring them with more force than necessary. "Well, for the moment, you're Dr. Green, a specialist from some big institution. That might buy us time, but if they dig deeper—" He frowned, feeling the weight of the predicament settling on his shoulders like a yoke. A few minutes later, as the smell of frying eggs curled through the air, Avalyn asked him to power on an old laptop she noticed on the counter. "I'll need to create a digital footprint if I'm to pass as an academic," she explained. Jason watched in astonishment as her fingers flew across the keyboard, inputting data far too swiftly for an ordinary human. Within moments, she was navigating university directories, forging digital credentials, and even creating a plausible biography for Dr. Avalyn Green from the University of Bristol's archaeology department. What are you doing exactly?" he asked, trying to keep one eye on the pan so the eggs wouldn't burn. "I'm accessing your internet's open databases, weaving them together to form a credible digital identity," she replied calmly. "Your systems are robust in quantity, but not very secure. Establishing an online presence with a few keystrokes is surprisingly easy if one knows how to bypass certain encryption protocols." Jason could only blink. "That's not terrifying at all." Avalyn's lips twitched in amusement. "I don't intend to harm anyone, but it's necessary if I'm to attend public functions without suspicion. The Heritage Society or local officials might check. This way, Dr. Avalyn Green has been publishing papers for years on little-known cultural artifacts. Now, if anyone searches, they'll find citations and references across several library archives." She closed the laptop, turning to accept the plate of scrambled eggs he handed her. While she ate, finding them adequate but missing certain proteins, Jason leaned against the counter. "We should check that study soon. And I guess we need to make a decision about the Heritage Society meeting tonight. It might be a risk, but if they're talking about the property, we have to know what they're planning." Avalyn paused mid-bite. "Agreed. If they push for a thorough inspection, it could uncover evidence of my presence. Or more dangerously, it could draw the eyes of the council if they already monitor communications relating to advanced technology." Her words sent a ripple of anxiety through Jason. The council, some cosmic, all-powerful government, might be listening in on phone calls, scanning signals, or who knew what else. The day was supposed to be about renovating an old house and filing mundane paperwork for local building codes. Instead, he found himself entangled in potential interstellar conflict. She finished her meal quickly. "Let's gather as much information as we can," she said, wiping her mouth. Your grandfather must have left clues about why he helped me in the first place. If we understand his plan, we might follow it, or improve upon it. Jason nodded, pushing off from the counter. His study is this way. It's always locked, but I've got the key. Though from the look of things, you're probably just as good at picking locks as forging digital identities. Evelyn's expression softened. I appreciate your trust, Jason. I know this is a lot. My pledge still stands, though it may unsettle you. In my culture, a life debt is a serious vow. He met her gaze, remembering the surreal moment she'd first emerged from that hidden chamber, kneeling before him. Something in that memory sent a faint thrill through him, stirring both curiosity and an odd sense of protectiveness. Let's just call it cooperation for now, he offered gently, and see where it leads. The study was a cozy, wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and pipe tobacco, a scent so strongly associated with his grandfather that Jason could almost picture the professor sitting behind the walnut desk. Rows of shelves groaned under the weight of ancient tomes, archaeological journals, and battered leather-bound notebooks. A small lamp on the desk provided a pool of warm light. Jason unlocked the cabinet behind the desk. Inside lay a stack of meticulously labeled journals. 1923 Mesopotamia, 1938 Excavation in Peru, 1942 Roswell, Oral Histories, and so on. He pulled them out, one by one, flipping through random pages. The handwriting was cramped, often accompanied by arcane symbols, sketches of strange artifacts, and references to clandestine organizations. He wasn't kidding about the weird stuff, Jason murmured. He found a few references to something called Project Gateway, but couldn't decipher the context. Evelyn leaned over his shoulder, scanning the pages. She paused, tapping a curious symbol that reappeared in multiple entries, a triple spiral with interlocking lines. This is associated with a faction known as the Coalition of Free Stars, she said quietly. They oppose the Council's dominance. Your grandfather must have been in contact with them, or at least researching their activities on Earth. Her voice dropped at that last sentence. I wonder if he was part of the reason I ended up here in this house, rather than some government facility. Jason's brow furrowed. Wait, so you never met him personally? She shook her head. My memories from before stasis are incomplete, like trying to recall a dream. I remember fleeing. I remember trust being offered by an older human scholar. That must have been your grandfather. But I have only fragments. They sifted through more notebooks, losing track of time as they read about uncharted expeditions, references to advanced relics said to be hidden around Earth's remote locales, and cryptic messages about preserving evidence. At one point, Jason found a folded newspaper clipping from 30 years ago, featuring a younger Professor Gregory Pierce standing beside a swirling, egg-shaped structure that looked suspiciously like the stasis pod in the basement. What if my grandfather was part of some underground network protecting alien refugees? Jason speculated, half in disbelief. He always told me stories about hidden truths, conspiracies. I never took them seriously. Evelyn pressed her lips together. If that's the case, this entire property is likely compromised by council scans. They might have known this was a hotbed of suspicious activity and monitored it. The only reason they never found me was the advanced shielding of that stasis pod. Jason set the clipping aside with trembling fingers. Then tonight's Heritage Society meeting could be the spark that sets off an entire chain of trouble. If outside investigators poke around, even with basic tools, they might trip some hidden defense, or send signals the council can pick up. He closed the cabinet door softly. We need a plan, but first we need to attend that meeting and dissuade them from a deep inspection. Evelyn nodded, her steady calm contrasting with Jason's anxious energy. Agreed, I'll maintain my human disguise. Let them believe I'm a dedicated researcher who's already begun detailed cataloging. If we can convince them to delay, we'll have time to search for more answers. She paused and her green eyes glinted in the lamplight. But know this, Jason, once the council is aware I've awakened, everything changes. There'll be no going back to a normal life. Jason felt a twist in his chest, a swirl of dread and excitement. Casting a final glance at the locked cabinet, he allowed himself one deep breath before heading out of the study. Normal life was overrated anyway, he said, mustering a grin. And as they walked together toward the uncertain night ahead, The future seemed both daunting and thrilling in ways he could never have imagined. That evening, Jason drove Avalon into the heart of Alderwood, their small town known mainly for its historic buildings and tightly knit community. The Heritage Society meeting was scheduled to take place at the local community center, a modest stone structure with tall windows that glowed invitingly in the dusk. Avalon remained composed in the passenger seat, maintaining her human guise, though he could sense her tension. Her posture was ramrod straight, and her eyes tracked every passing car and pedestrian. Jason knew she was wary of unexpected visitors, possibly alien enforcers, who might sense her presence or detect advanced technology if they were already in the area. He parked beneath a flickering streetlight, swallowing his own jitters as he killed the engine. We just go in, make our case that a formal inspection would be premature, and get out, he reminded her. If anyone asks too many questions, you say you're still in the preliminary phase of research. Avalon nodded, brushing non-existent lint from her conservative blazer. People will be curious. I'll do my best to stay vague while appearing cooperative. Subterfuge isn't my people's strength. We value openness. But I'll try to mimic the human approach to half-truths. He tried not to smile. He'd come to appreciate her forthrightness, but tonight they needed diplomacy. They climbed the short flight of steps to the community center's front entrance, where an old wooden door led to a foyer plastered with local announcements. A small sign pointed them down a corridor to a meeting room that buzzed with chatter. The smell of stale coffee and sugar cookies wafted from a folding table at the room's edge. Seated around a ring of plastic chairs were about 24 townspeople, including a few Jason recognized. Linda Grantham from the local newspaper, Councilman Avery with his usual stern expression, and Emily Dunbar, who ran the historical tours every summer. Meanwhile, at a sturdy wooden podium in front stood Mayor Ellis, a middle-aged woman with sharp eyes and a welcoming smile. Spotting Jason and Avalon, the mayor beckoned them over with a slight wave. As they made their way through the crowd, Hannah Stokes caught Jason's elbow. She gave Avalon a quick, up-down glance, curiosity brimming behind her eyes. "Glad you both made it," she said. "The group's already buzzing about the Pierce property. Apparently, word has gotten around that Professor Pierce left behind some unusual items. Lucas Hagen, the building inspector, has been hinting at structural issues in your basement. Might want to address that." She cast a furtive glance at Avalon, as though expecting the doctor to confirm or deny the rumor on the spot. Avalon merely offered a professional nod. "I'll be sure to update everyone once my analysis is complete." The measured calm in her voice seemed to reassure Hannah, who nodded and headed off to claim a seat. Jason exhaled. "Okay," he whispered to Avalon. "Let's just try to blend in." They took seats near the back, hoping to remain inconspicuous. This plan failed immediately, as Mayor Ellis welcomed them by name, inviting the esteemed Dr. Green to speak about her initial findings on the house's historical value. This was it. Jason gripped the chair, bracing himself as Avalon rose and walked to the front, posture confident and expression poised. Her composure suggested she'd done this sort of public speaking 1,000 times before, though in reality she was an alien adept at hacking networks, not a typical scholar. Either way, her unflappable grace silenced the hum of conversation. "Good evening," she began, voice echoing slightly off the tan-colored walls. "I'm Dr. Avalon Green, and I've been working with Mr. Pierce to catalog the late Professor Gregory Pierce's collection. While it's true he gathered a range of intriguing artifacts, we are still at a very early stage of analysis. As such, I would gently advise caution before sanctioning any official inspections. Bringing in outside parties prematurely could disturb the delicate context of these findings." The moment she said the word delicate, one of the older men in the front row, Mr. Weaver, whom Jason remembered as a perpetually skeptical figure, cleared his throat loudly. "Look, Dr. Green," he said, "we're all for preserving any historical treasures. But the fact is, the Pierce place is on our town's heritage roster. It's a building of interest. If the rumors about hidden rooms and questionable wiring are true, we need to ensure safety and compliance." Avalon inclined her head. "Of course, safety is paramount. I simply request sufficient time to determine the provenance of the items. Some pieces may be sensitive or fragile. The professor's notes indicate that his collection spans a range of periods and cultures. We'd prefer not to risk mishandling." Before Mr. Weaver could retort, Lucas Hagen stood from a corner seat. He was a tall, lanky man with a perpetually furrowed brow. Jason's only prior interaction with him had been last week, when Hagen informed him the house's electrical system might be flagged under local codes. Now Hagen wore the same no-nonsense expression as he addressed the group. I've been inside that basement, and it's in rough shape. If Dr. Green and Mr. Pierce insist on taking their time, fine. But we need documented plans, detailed explanations of how the property is being updated. Otherwise, we'll have no choice but to schedule a municipal inspection. Jason felt Evelyn's eyes flick toward him. This was precisely what they hoped to avoid. A group of curious locals swarming over the basement, potentially discovering the stasis pod's remnants, or worse, alerting any watchers from beyond Earth. Mr. Hagen, she replied gently, I'd be happy to draft a preliminary report on the structural state of the basement within a week. A formal inspection can follow if it remains necessary. A tense silence followed, broken only by the scratch of pens on notepads. Then Mayor Ellis cleared her throat. All right, so it sounds like Dr. Green will provide a preliminary report in a week's time. If that's satisfactory, we'll hold off scheduling an immediate inspection. She swept her gaze across the attendees. Does anyone object to that timeline? A few murmurs arose, but no one voiced outright objection. Hagen shrugged, though he still looked skeptical. Weaver crossed his arms, evidently displeased, but not inclined to push the matter further. With that settled, the meeting proceeded to other agenda items, local events, a fundraiser for the community park, and the perennial discussion about preserving the old train station. Jason exhaled in relief, his heart finally easing from its frenetic pace. He caught Evelyn's eye and gave her a subtle nod of gratitude. She returned a quick, tight smile, as though acknowledging that victory was only temporary. They still had to produce some official-looking report, and quickly. When the meeting adjourned, folks milled about, chatting in clusters. Hannah cornered Jason near a table with stale donuts. She's impressive, she remarked, nodding toward Evelyn, who was conversing politely with an elderly couple. And obviously you two have gotten close. Her tone was leading, and Jason knew she was fishing for personal details. We've been working together a lot, Jason offered vaguely. She's just very focused, and I'm pretty desperate to figure out what all Grandpa left behind. You know me, I was never big on his old relics. Hannah chuckled. True, you were the kid more interested in video games than in your grandfather's dusty artifacts. But hey, you do seem different these days, Jason. Maybe all this is good for you, a new adventure or something. He forced a casual smile and grabbed a donut, hoping to mask the jolt of anxiety he felt whenever he remembered the genuine magnitude of that adventure. A stowaway alien, a possible cosmic threat, in a basement holding secrets that might shake more than just their small town. They made their way outside a few minutes later, politely fending off more questions. The sky had grown dark, and the lampposts lining the sidewalks cast overlapping circles of pale light. People lingered on the steps, discussing the meeting's outcomes. Jason spotted Lucas Hagen heading toward his truck, still carrying that clipboard under one arm, doubtlessly planning another approach if he sensed something amiss. Evelyn slipped her hand through the crook of Jason's elbow, an unexpected gesture that made his pulse skip. We should maintain appearances, she murmured, her voice low enough not to be overheard by the departing crowd. Hannah suspects there's more to our relationship than simple research collaboration. He shot her a sideways look. So you think we should pretend to be romantically involved? His cheeks warmed as he asked the question. Isn't that taking it a bit far? Her lips curved in a faint smile. I'm only following your suggestion to blend in. And from the data I've gathered, humans find romantic narratives less suspicious than hastily explained academic partnerships. It's a convenient cover. Jason cleared his throat awkwardly. Right, cover, sure. As if his mind needed another layer of confusion about Evelyn. Something about her presence always crackled with energy, a feeling he couldn't fully describe, like an electric current passing between them. It was both thrilling and unsettling, made all the more intense by the knowledge that she could pick up on his reactions through her advanced senses. They reached Jason's pickup, an aging yet reliable vehicle once belonging to his grandfather. The passenger door squeaked in protest as Evelyn climbed in. Jason circled around and slid behind the steering wheel. Before he could turn the key, she placed a hand on his arm, her grip cool through his jacket. "We're not alone," she said quietly, her gaze fixed on the rearview mirror. He craned his neck to see what she saw. Initially, the darkness yielded nothing, but a subtle shape glinted, a metallic reflection moving with an unnatural smoothness across the sidewalk under a dim street lamp. A figure, tall, slender, almost featureless, stepped into the cone of light. Its surface gleamed like quicksilver. It froze for a split second, then vanished with a strange fluid motion into the alleyway beside the community center. Jason's heart thundered. "An enforcer?" he whispered, looking at Evelyn for confirmation. She nodded grimly, slipping momentarily into her native green hue before regaining the human mask. "I believe so, or at least a scout drone. The council must have picked up traces of my energy signature." Her voice shook with a tinge of dread. "We should leave now." Jason turned the ignition, and the old truck rumbled to life. He peeled away from the curb in a hurry that likely drew stares from the remaining onlookers. Evelyn twisted in her seat to watch behind them, scanning the street for any sign of pursuit. For a tense few blocks, everything seemed normal. Just the quiet hush of a small town at night, a smattering of headlights passing by. Yet the air felt charged, as if a storm was about to break. "Head back to the house?" Jason asked, voice tight. "Or do you think that's the first place they'll look?" Evelyn exhaled. "They'll likely investigate the basement, but my stasis pod has limited shielding. It might help mask our presence. Unless we can think of somewhere else that can scramble an alien scanner, they'll track us no matter where we go." Jason pressed down on the accelerator, torn between the urge to escape and the reality that any real solution lay in uncovering the secrets hidden in his grandfather's research. They reached his grandfather's house, the porch light flickering in a solitary glow on the ramshackle veranda. Jason pulled the truck around back, killing the headlights before they were fully parked. The neighborhood was quiet, and no one seemed to be lurking in the nearby yards, but that did little to dispel his mounting unease. Evelyn's tone was clipped as she unfastened her seatbelt. "Give me a moment to scan the immediate area." She closed her eyes and a subtle glow emanated beneath her lids, her technology interfacing with the environment, searching for foreign signals or surveillance devices. After several seconds, she opened them again. "I detect a faint quantum ripple, likely from the drone, but it's not here right now. We have a small window." Quietly, they slipped into the house through the back door. Jason locked it behind them, though he had no illusions a simple deadbolt would deter an advanced alien machine. The tension followed them like a shadow as they proceeded to the study, where dusty shelves and old lamps greeted them in dim lamplight. The hush in the house was intense, as though it too was bracing for an intrusion. Evelyn wasted no time. She began pulling books from shelves, flipping through pages with rapid efficiency. "We need to find anything referencing council infiltration, quantum displacement, or shield generation," she said, piling volumes on the desk. "Your grandfather undoubtedly knew more than he shared in casual journals. If there's a blueprint or formula for advanced shielding, it might help us." Jason rifled through an old leather-bound notebook, scanning the lines of spidery handwriting until he reached a mention of Artifact 17, potential cloaking mechanism. He recognized the drawing as something he had once dismissed as merely an odd sculpture, a conical device with intricate etchings. "I think this might still be upstairs in the attic," he said, excitement cracking through his anxiety. "Remember how Grandpa always said some pieces were too dangerous to keep on display? He stashed them away." Evelyn nodded. "If it truly is a cloaking mechanism, we could amplify it with the stasis pod systems." She paused, glancing at the dark corridor beyond the study door. "We must act quickly. If the enforcer arrives, we may not have time to retrieve it." They headed up the narrow staircase, the wooden steps creaking under their hurried footsteps. Once in the attic, Jason swung a flashlight around the cluttered space. Boxes, old furniture draped in sheets, piles of newspapers turning yellow with age. The air smelled stale and thick, with dust motes swirling in the beam of light. "Here," Evelyn said, kneeling beside a wooden crate labeled "Antique Pieces. Fragile." Together, they pried open the lid, rummaging through packing straw and bubble wrap, until they uncovered a cone-shaped object about the size of a coffee thermos. Its bronze-like metal shimmered with the same shifting runes they'd seen on the stasis pod. Jason's pulse quickened. This must be it. Any clue how it works? He handed the artifact to Evelyn, who held it carefully. At her touch, a faint glow rippled along its surface, as if it recognized her. She closed her eyes again, focusing deeply. It's keyed to a specific frequency, probably the same used by my people before the council took control. If we can power this artifact with the pod's energy source, it might shield us from external scans. She opened her eyes and looked at him, hope mingled with urgency. Let's get it downstairs. But just as Jason rose to lead the way, they heard the distinctive sound of splintering wood from below. Something had forced entry into the house. The enforcer or one of its mechanical kin had found them. Fear shot through Jason's veins like liquid ice. He and Evelyn exchanged a single sharp glance before he flicked off the flashlight, plunging the attic into near darkness. Only a thin moonbeam filtered through a small, dusty window. They had to move quietly. The intruder was already inside, and the old house's creaking floorboards offered little cover. Evelyn clutched the artifact close. Down the back stairs, she whispered, gesturing to a narrow secondary staircase that led to the kitchen. We have to reach the basement. We can use the pod's containment protocols, maybe even attempt a short-range quantum displacement if necessary. Jason nodded, heart pounding. In the silent gloom, they eased open the attic door and stepped onto the dark staircase. Each step seemed to echo louder than thunder in his ears. He thought he heard a faint metallic scraping from below, though it was impossible to pinpoint the source. A catastrophic crash sounded from somewhere on the main floor. A door or piece of furniture hurled aside with inhuman force. The intruder was tearing through the house systematically. They made it to the kitchen doorway unscathed, but as they ducked inside, Jason heard the distinct grinding whir of something shifting behind them. Light, cold, and silvery, spilled through the hall. The enforcer's shimmering outline advanced in an unnaturally smooth glide, its liquid metal surface reflecting the modest overhead lamp. It was tall, its elongated limbs moving with calm mechanical efficiency. The face, if it could be called that, was featureless, save for a single dark slit that might have been a sensor of some kind. Without turning its head, the enforcer's voice reverberated, a metallic monotone. Evelyn of the Free Star Coalition, you are declared a hostile entity. Relinquish the artifact and prepare for immediate detainment. Evelyn inched backward, placing herself between the enforcer and Jason. They've probably locked on to my life signature, she murmured. It'll detect me no matter where I run unless we disrupt the signal. Jason's eyes flicked to the basement door just 10 feet away. If they could reach the stasis pod, maybe they could erect that containment field like before. But it was a gamble. The enforcer was so close. Still, they had no choice. We have to try, he whispered. Evelyn's response was swift. She unlatched a knife from a hidden compartment in her blazer. He hadn't even realized she was carrying any kind of blade, and hurled it with shocking force. The enforcer's chest rippled in response, absorbing the impact as though the metal were liquid. The blade clattered to the floor. Unfazed, the intruder glided forward. Go! Evelyn hissed at Jason, her eyes flaring green. She lunged for the creature, feigning a direct attack. For an instant, Jason froze, panic locking his muscles. Then he forced himself into motion, sprinting for the basement door and flinging it open. Evelyn twisted aside as the enforcer's arm elongated, forming a narrow lance aimed straight for her torso. She ducked, evading by inches. Sparks flew as the alien metal sliced through the countertop. Her camouflage flickered, revealing patches of emerald green skin, but she refused to yield. With a burst of speed, she pivoted and bolted through the same door Jason had just opened. The enforcer moved to follow, but Evelyn slammed the door shut behind her, twisting the old lock. The barrier wouldn't hold for long, but it gave them a second of breathing room. They thundered down the steps, reaching the basement. The stasis pod gleamed in its recessed niche, glowing with faint turquoise symbols. Jason ran straight to it, fumbling for the power controls. Last time I just touched here, I think. He pressed a hand against the swirling lines, heart hammering. Meanwhile, Evelyn stood guard at the foot of the staircase, brandishing the conical artifact. The door exploded outward in a shower of splinters, revealing the enforcer in a haze of dust. Its gaze, if it had one, locked onto Evelyn and Jason with chilling precision. "Resistance is ineffectual. Surrender and be neutralized," it droned, voice cold as interstellar vacuum. Evelyn's hand flew in a series of gestures over the artifact she held, each motion lighting up another ring of symbols on its bronze-like surface. Jason could sense energy thrumming in the air, as if the device were charging. Yet the enforcer showed no hesitation, already preparing to strike with an arm that reformed into a razor-edged blade. Jason slammed his palm more firmly against the stasis pod. The swirling lines blossomed with light, responding to his frantic attempts to activate whatever function had saved them before blown. "Come on," he whispered through clenched teeth. "You did this the first time. Just do it again." As if in answer, the symbols across the pod glowed brighter, and a thin field of crackling energy began to expand. It fluttered around them like a fragile bubble. "Evelyn!" Jason shouted. "Pull that device into the field." She pivoted toward him. The enforcer lunged. For a heart-stopping instant, Jason was sure the blade would run her through. But in a display of almost impossible agility, Evelyn twisted out of the blade's arc and dove backward, crossing the threshold of the forming energy shield. The artifact, held close to her chest, emitted a high-pitched whine that intensified as it touched the field. Suddenly, arcs of light rippled from the stasis pod to the artifact, linking them in a web of alien script that pulsed like a living thing. The enforcer tried to follow, but its metallic limbs slammed against the shimmering boundary, sending up a spume of sparks. The protective shield held, at least for the moment. Evelyn gasped, pressing a hand to her side where a shallow cut marred her now partially emerald skin. "We've got seconds at best," she hissed. "The Council's tech is relentless. We need to do a quantum jump or disrupt its scanners permanently." Jason racked his brain, remembering the way Evelyn had teleported them from the mill earlier, an experience akin to being squeezed through a collapsing tunnel. It had nearly caused him to pass out, but now the alternative was a deadly confrontation they couldn't possibly win. "Do it," he urged. "Get us out of here." Without further hesitation, Evelyn wove her fingers around the artifact's etched lines, and the stasis pod's protective symbols began to swirl as though forming a vortex of energy. Wind whipped through the basement, rattling tools and debris. The enforcer pounded against the shield, each blow cracking the swirling barrier more. At the final moment, Evelyn grabbed Jason's hand. "Brace yourself." The world erupted in a blaze of light. Jason felt that same gut-wrenching pull from before, like being yanked inside out and hurtled across an immeasurable distance. His vision blurred, his ears rang, and every cell in his body tingled with electric fire. Then, abruptly, the sensation ceased. He staggered, nearly collapsing to his knees. Evelyn's grip was the only thing keeping him upright. Dimly, he realized they were outdoors. Crisp, cool air brushed his skin. Grass rustled underfoot. He glanced around, blinking in shock. They stood beside the old Alderwood textile mill, an abandoned building on the outskirts of town. Rows of half-broken windows stretched up the towering brick walls. Rusted metal gears and disused looms crowded the interior. He recalled the place from childhood, a relic from Alderwood's industrial heyday. "Why here?" he managed to croak through the nausea. Evelyn steadied him, her breathing ragged. "This structure's ferrous content is high. It scrambles scans. I remembered you telling me about it earlier. It should temporarily mask us. But I don't know how long before the enforcer recalibrates." They had escaped immediate annihilation, but their predicament remained dire. Jason tried to catch his breath, mind awhirl with the knowledge that the Council wouldn't stop until Evelyn was captured, or worse. And now she was bleeding from a wound meant to kill her. The night was far from over. Night pressed heavily around the abandoned Alderwood textile mill, every broken window and rusted metal beam looming like silent witnesses to Jason and Evelyn's predicament. Wind sighed through the empty corridors, carrying distant echoes that could have been small animals or the unsettled remnants of the mill's past. Heart pounding, Jason leaned against a toppled loom, trying to shake off the lingering nausea of the quantum jump that had deposited them here. His flashlight's narrow beam illuminated swirling dust motes and patches of graffiti that years of neglect had allowed to flourish on the walls. To his left, Evelyn crouched, pressing her palm against the wound on her side, green skin showing through the patchy camouflage, her breathing unsteady but determined. "I'm okay," she said, though Jason could sense the pain etched in her tense posture. "It's shallow. I can regenerate, but not quickly, without proper medical resources." The artifact in her other hand still glowed faintly, a testament to the dangerous energies they had harnessed. Outside, the moonless sky offered little light, but at least for now, there was no sign of the Enforcer's silver shape. Jason inhaled a ragged breath. That, that was too close," he murmured. The memory of the Enforcer shattering the basement door clung to his mind like a nightmare. He still felt the shock of each blow hitting the shield they had cobbled together from the stasis pod and the artifact. "How did it find us so fast? I thought the house might still have some protective measures left." Avalon's brow furrowed. "My guess is that the Council left surveillance protocols on Earth long before I even arrived, possibly long before your grandfather acquired that property. Once I was out of stasis, every burst of energy, every quantum distortion would ping their networks, giving them intermittent glimpses of my location. They probably have drones scattered across this region, scanning for any anomalies." Her eyes flicked to the shadows as though she half expected more scouts to materialize. "We're not safe here forever, either. The mill's metal structures will hamper their standard scans, but it won't take them long to employ more advanced methods." He ran a hand through his hair. "Then we need a real plan. We can't keep teleporting around Alderwood every time one of these things shows up. The entire town is at risk," and he swallowed, picturing Hannah, Sarah the blogger, and all the regular folks who had no idea that an interstellar cat-and-mouse game was unfolding in their backyard. Avalon's expression softened. "Jason, I understand if you want to walk away. I've brought danger to your doorstep. Your entire life turned upside down in the span of a day. My people have a saying, truth is a star that shows us the path, but it can also scorch the ground beneath our feet. And you're standing in that fire now." He gazed back at her, mind flashing through the events of the past hours. Discovering the poem, her first words, the improbable moment they'd fled the Enforcer, and the Heritage Society meeting where they'd pretended to be just another young couple, when in reality they were fighting to protect a secret that could impact worlds. "I can't just leave you," he said, voice firm. "And anyway, Grandpa clearly intended me to find you, or at least be part of whatever he started. We have to figure this out together." "But how?" Her wounded side rose and fell with each labored breath. "We need answers beyond what was in your grandfather's journals. He mentioned traveling to places across the globe, collecting artifacts that might disrupt or hide from the Council. If we can activate them, it could buy us time, or even turn the tables." Jason squared his shoulders. "Then we should gather everything he hid. Some might be outside Alderwood. If the Council's watchers have mostly scanned this region, we could slip away, maybe use some of Grandpa's research leads to track down new tools or allies." Avalon managed a faint smile. "Yes, but before we move on, we must ensure no immediate harm befalls the people you care about here." Her gaze flicked to the darkness, where a battered door hung off its hinges. The Enforcer or others might lash out if they sense interference. "Right," Jason agreed, adrenaline spiking anew. "Let's see if Sarah can help. She's got that local news blog. Maybe we can warn everyone without telling them the full truth." He felt a wave of doubt. Would anyone believe talk of advanced technology or mysterious attackers without demanding proof? Then again, Sarah loves sensational stories. Even a vague warning might prompt the town to stay indoors for a bit, potentially reducing casualties if the Enforcer returned. "We'll figure it out," he repeated, perhaps trying to convince himself as much as Avalon. They settled into a dark corner of the mill's second floor, where a series of old offices overlooked the dusty factory floor. It wasn't comfortable, but it offered a vantage point. With chairs overturned and desks missing drawers, the space seemed frozen in time. Using the faint light from a tiny LED lamp Jason had on his keychain, Avalon examined her wound more closely. The gash ran diagonally across her rib cage, green blood oozing gently whenever she shifted. She closed her eyes and pressed her hands around it, inhaling with a controlled, meditative rhythm. "Some sort of self-healing technique?" Jason asked, voice hushed in the silent expanse of the old office. She nodded. We have methods of accelerating cellular repair, though it takes concentration and ideally a stable environment. Under duress, it's slower, but I can at least stop the worst of the bleeding. While she focused on her healing, Jason rummaged through one of the broken desk drawers and found a half-used roll of medical gauze, presumably a leftover from a first aid kit many years ago. Though old, it seemed clean enough. Kneeling beside Evelyn, he carefully wrapped the gauze around her torso, trying to cover the torn edges of her clothing and minimize further contamination. The makeshift bandage felt woefully inadequate. Still, she offered him a grateful nod when he was finished. "Thank you," she whispered, voice tight. "This body is more resilient than yours in certain ways, but I still feel pain." There was a brief vulnerability in her eyes that reminded Jason just how alien she was, and yet how human she could also seem. "If we make it through all this," he said, "we'll get you actual medical treatment. I'm sure there's something out there that can help, even if it's not from Earth. But right now, we need a safe place to regroup." He paused, recalling a conversation he had once overheard between his grandfather and a friend. They'd spoken of a remote cabin near Lake Merritt, a property that Gregory Pierce had purchased under an alias. Jason hadn't thought much of it at the time, but now it struck him as the perfect bolt hole, far from Alderwood, well outside the usual routes of random visitors. He mentioned the idea and Evelyn lifted her gaze. "That might work," she said, flexing her shoulders experimentally. "If the cabin is secluded, we can buy ourselves the time we need to analyze the rest of your grandfather's notes and plan our next move." A sudden buzzing from Jason's phone made them both jump. In the gloom, the screen glowed like a beacon. Sarah's name flashed across it. She must be calling after the flurry of text messages he'd sent earlier, partial warnings about dangerous individuals around the property. Jason had typed those messages in a rush while they were still in the truck, hoping she would heed them. Stepping into an even darker corner, he answered in a near whisper. "Sarah?" Her voice came through tense, crackling with worry. "Jason, where are you? I went by your house a few minutes ago. Doors smashed in. The place looked like a tornado hit it. Are you okay? The whole town is buzzing with rumors about break-ins and weird sightings." Jason drew a slow breath. He couldn't possibly tell her everything, but he had to convey the seriousness. "I'm safe, but it's not good. There's someone after me. I can't explain on the phone, but you need to warn people to stay away from my house. Maybe keep a distance from the area until I can figure out how to deal with this." He hesitated, scanning the dark outline of Evelyn behind him. "Please, Sarah, if you trust me, post a warning on your blog or something." Sarah's silence lasted a beat too long, then she exhaled in a rush. "I'll do it. But you owe me details, Jason. And I'm getting calls from Hannah, too. She says you and that Dr. Green vanished after the meeting. She wants to make sure you are not in trouble." "I am in trouble," he admitted, heartbreak tightening his voice. "But I'll handle it. Thanks, Sarah. I have to go." He hung up before she could protest further. Pressing his phone to his chest, he turned to Evelyn, mind racing. "We have to leave tonight before the enforcer or any of its kind pick up our trail again." They spent the next hour methodically combing the old mill, gathering anything that could help them survive on the run, though the pickings were slim. Jason found a rusted utility knife, some old rags, and a battered metal pry bar. Evelyn discovered a coil of industrial cable, which she insisted could be used to rig a makeshift sensor disruptor if they combined it with the artifact in the stasis pod's energy. However, the stasis pod itself remained back at the house, now likely under enforcer control, or, at the very least, thoroughly compromised. Its built-in technology had saved them once, but was no longer an option. Jason hefted the pry bar, testing its balance. "I doubt this is going to do much against a shape-shifting alien enforcer, but I guess it's better than nothing." Evelyn gave a faint nod, still looking pale. "It's possible we'll run into more drones or enforcers on our way out of town. Council operatives often work in teams." She carefully slipped the bronze artifact into a satchel they'd fashioned from old cloth. "I'll try to conceal the artifact's energy signature, but the process isn't perfect. The Council's sensors could still detect small anomalies." Her words elicited a spike of fear in Jason. How were they supposed to outrun an advanced galactic authority if each jump or use of alien tech revealed their location? He remembered Sarah's voice on the phone, the worry layered beneath her frustration. This wasn't just about him and Evelyn anymore. An entire community was at risk. "Let's slip out the back," he said. "There's a disused logging road that runs behind the property. If we follow it for a mile or so, we can circle back to my truck. It's hidden near that dirt path." Outside, the air was colder, and clouds concealed the stars, leaving them in deep darkness. Jason shone his small flashlight along the ground, while Evelyn kept watch for any flicker of silver or unnatural movement in the distance. The night was eerily silent, broken only by the crunch of gravel under their feet and the throbbing of Jason's heartbeat in his ears. They proceeded along the overgrown logging trail, brushing past dead vines and jagged branches that tugged at their clothes. At one point, a sudden rustle in the bushes made them both freeze, hearts hammering. But it was only a startled raccoon that scampered away into the brush. After that, they moved more cautiously, nerves jangling like taut wires. If the enforcer or its drones found them here in open ground with nowhere to hide, it would be over in seconds. Eventually, they reached the spot where Jason had stashed his truck earlier. Miraculously, no sign of tampering. He motioned for Evelyn to stay back while he checked the vehicle, half expecting to find a tracker or sabotage. A quick check of the undercarriage and engine didn't reveal anything obvious, though that didn't guarantee an advanced alien device wasn't hidden somewhere, undetectable by human eyes. "Looks clean," he whispered, relief threading into his tension. Evelyn gingerly climbed into the passenger seat, clutching the satchel that held the artifact. Jason slid into the driver's seat, turning the ignition. The engine coughed, then roared to life in a way that had never sounded so reassuring. "Lake Merritt is about 2 hours north," he said, glancing at the fuel gauge. "We'll need to refuel at some point, but if we can reach the cabin by sunrise, we can hunker down and plan our next move." Evelyn's posture was rigid with pain or anticipation, possibly both. "Yes, that's our best chance. Stay alert for anything unusual. Lights in the sky, unfamiliar vehicles. The council sometimes mimics local authorities or civilian cars." Jason nodded grimly. "We'll watch each other's backs." Shifting into drive, he pulled the truck onto the narrow back road, heading away from Alderwood. A swirl of conflicting emotions crowded his thoughts. Relief that they'd evaded immediate danger, guilt for leaving the house in its wrecked condition, and an abiding sense that this journey had only begun. In the distance, the faint glow of the town disappeared behind a curtain of night. Hours later, the truck's headlights carved a narrow path through a dense forest road, the moon still hidden behind overcast skies. Jason hunched over the wheel, eyes straining to discern any movement beyond the beams. It was well past midnight when they finally reached the turnoff for Lake Merritt, a gravel lane winding between towering pines. With every bump and jostle, the truck rattled as though protesting the rugged terrain. "You're sure about this cabin's location?" Evelyn asked quietly, peering into the darkness. She had dozed intermittently during the drive, her breathing uneven as her body attempted to heal. The gauze around her wound was stained but not soaked, which Jason took as a hopeful sign. "Reasonably sure," he replied. "Grandpa only mentioned it in passing, and I'm not certain how often he even came out here. But the property records I found at the house indicated some land under a different name. He must have thought it was safer to keep it off the grid." He navigated a sharp turn, wincing as branches scraped the side of the truck. "If we can't find it, we'll just have to hole up in the woods and hope the enforcer can't track us." Evelyn's face hardened with determination. "I'd rather not rely on hope alone. The council's resources are vast. Secrecy and unpredictability are our strongest assets now." She glanced at the satchel, where the artifact's dull glow seeped through the fabric. "We must also use that unpredictability to uncover more about what your grandfather truly knew. Perhaps he discovered a way to shield Earth entirely from the council's interference, or at least hamper it." Jason swallowed the knot of worry forming in his throat. The idea of Grandpa having a plan to protect Earth from cosmic overlords seemed surreal, yet everything in the past 24 hours had redefined impossible. He pressed onward until finally the gravel path opened into a small clearing. In the gloom, a dark shape stood, a single-story cabin with a pitched roof shrouded by tall conifers. The windows looked dark, and no sign of recent life marred the overgrown clearing. He parked near what might have once been a wooden fence. The truck engine idled, crackling in the still night. Hesitant, Jason flicked off the headlights and stepped outside, carrying a flashlight and the pry bar. Evelyn followed, limping slightly, though she tried to hide it. Together they approached the front porch, which creaked ominously under their combined weight. "Locked," Jason muttered after testing the door. He glanced at Evelyn, half expecting her to produce some alien tool to open it. Instead, she gestured for him to try a simpler approach. With a few firm strikes of the pry bar, the aged lock gave way, and the door swung inward. The interior smelled of dust, stale air, and rotting wood. They panned the flashlight across a Spartan living area, a small sofa draped with a threadbare cover, a wooden table with 2 chairs, and a cold fireplace stacked with old logs. The air felt heavy and long undisturbed, yet not malevolent, merely forgotten. Jason inhaled, a mixture of nostalgia and sadness blooming in his chest. Even though he had never visited this place, it felt like an extension of his grandfather's mysterious life. Evelyn eased the door shut behind them. "We should do a quick sweep, make sure no one else is here, no hidden devices." Despite her exhaustion, she insisted on taking one side of the cabin while Jason checked the other. The place wasn't large, just a bedroom, a bathroom, and a small closet plus the main living space. Everything was basic: a sink without running water, a dusty cot, a few lanterns, and some rusted cookware. "All clear," Jason reported after a few minutes, returning to the living area. "Nothing out of the ordinary, aside from the fact it looks like nobody's set foot in here for years." Evelyn sank onto the sofa, wincing at her injury. "That's likely a good sign. Fewer footprints, fewer eyes." She patted the spot next to her, and Jason took a seat. The meager glow of his flashlight illuminated her face, revealing lines of strain. "We'll need to rest, but not for long. In the morning we can try to search for any hidden compartments. Your grandfather was quite fond of those." A flicker of humor tugged at Jason's lips. "No kidding. Let's just hope we don't find any more pods with hidden extraterrestrials inside." Evelyn's expression turned thoughtful. "You never know. Your grandfather seemed to have contacts in my part of the galaxy. It's possible he helped others besides me. This cabin could be another refuge." She exhaled softly. "For now, though, we stay quiet, gather strength, and then dig deeper." Jason nodded, exhaustion finally hitting him in a wave. He turned off the flashlight to conserve the battery, plunging them into gentle darkness. Outside, the forest whispered. Inside, 2 fugitives, one human, one alien, clung to the fragile hope that morning might bring solutions or at least a temporary calm. Morning arrived with muted light filtering through the cabin's grimy windows. The hush of the forest seemed vast and indifferent to the cosmic stakes. Jason awoke stiffly on the hard sofa, his neck bent at an awkward angle. Evelyn, curled on a makeshift pallet of blankets on the floor, stirred when he shifted position. Overnight, she must have peeled away the torn fabric around her wound, rebandaging it carefully. Though pale, she looked more rested, her breathing steadier. "We should check outside," she murmured, voice still husky from sleep. "Make sure no aerial drones or scanning ships have tracked us." She eased herself upright, blinking in the faint morning glow. Jason nodded, rubbing the bleariness from his eyes. "I'll do a quick perimeter walk. You keep that wound stable." He rummaged in his grandfather's old trunk. He'd found it tucked in the closet last night, and dug out an ancient pair of binoculars. Slinging them around his neck, he stepped onto the porch, greeted by crisp forest air. Mist clung to the tree line, shifting as a gentle breeze rippled through the branches. Circling the cabin, he found no sign of footprints or disturbances, no glimmers of silver, no bizarre scorch marks. For once, quiet seemed to reign. Climbing a small rocky outcrop near the cabin gave him a vantage point over the lake, its still waters reflecting the dense evergreens. With the binoculars, Jason scanned the sky, then the tree line, searching for unnatural shapes or movements. He saw only wildlife, a few birds, squirrels darting in the canopy, a lone deer sipping from the lake's edge. Relieved, he returned to the cabin. Evelyn had managed to stand and was scanning an old ledger with intense focus, brow knitted. "I found this in the trunk," she explained as he entered, gesturing to the battered notebook in her hands. Some sections mentioned cellar expansions and lockbox routes. There's a code referencing geographic coordinates, which might align with other safe houses or artifact caches your grandfather set up. Jason perked up, sliding onto the sofa beside Ear. So this could lead us to more technology like that stasis pod? Evelyn's eyes glinted with cautious optimism. Potentially. Or it might detail smaller protective devices. If your grandfather was part of a hidden network dedicated to sheltering off-world refugees, these lines of text could be part of an entire route spanning continents. Heart thumping, Jason glanced over the ledger. The writing was indeed cryptic, peppered with references to marker number 3 and key reversal, site B. One entry scrawled near the margin read, "In the event of hostile approach, remove central node and proceed to Station Redwood." It dawned on Jason that Station Redwood might be the code name for this cabin, given the dense pine forest and seclusion. "I wish I'd paid more attention when he told his stories," Jason lamented. "But we can figure it out. My phone might still get a signal around here. We can try the cross-referencing these coordinates." A pang of worry shot through him. "But if I turn it on, the council might track us." Evelyn frowned. "Yes, that's a risk. We need a way to block their scanners. The artifact can mask small distortions for a short period, but a phone signal might give them a lock on our general area." She pursed her lips, thinking. "Alternatively, we can drive to the nearest town, about 15 miles from here, and access a public computer. That would keep your personal devices offline." Jason considered the idea. "That might work. We'd have to be quick. Also, we should keep an eye out for any mention of vehicles or strange people. The council's enforcers could disguise themselves as locals. But if we can figure out these coordinates, we might unearth the bigger plan Grandpa had. Maybe the tools to fight back." "Fight back," Evelyn echoed quietly, glancing at the bandage on her side. "It's been a long time since I felt hope that my people's mission could continue. If the professor truly left behind a chain of sanctuaries, we might save more than just ourselves. The Council's grip reaches every star system they deem undeveloped. Earth is on the threshold of technologies the Council fears. Because once a planet achieves interstellar capabilities without Council oversight, it can ally with rebellious factions." Jason set a comforting hand on her shoulder, recalling the professor's unyielding conviction in the face of ridicule. "Then that's what we do," he said simply. "We follow his clues, harness what we can, and show the Council Earth isn't going to be another puppet planet." By midday, they executed their plan. After a sparse breakfast of canned beans found in a cupboard, far from gourmet but enough to quell hunger, they drove cautiously out of the forest, mindful of any watchers. The back roads felt deserted, which was both a relief and unnerving. Evelyn used the artifact's subtle field to blur the truck's electromagnetic signature, though she warned it would only be effective at short range. They had to minimize exposure. 40 minutes later, they reached a small county seat with a single gas station, a post office, and a diner that doubled as a hub for local gossip. Parking away from the diner's main entrance, Jason and Evelyn slipped inside, the scent of frying bacon and fresh coffee washing over them. They were both grimy from the night's ordeal. Evelyn kept her hood pulled up to conceal any slip in her camouflage. Tension coiled in Jason's gut as they took a booth near the back, scanning the patrons for anything suspicious. A middle-aged waitress ambled over, setting down 2 laminated menus. "What can I get you folks today?" she asked, polite but not overly curious. Just another day in a quiet town. Jason exhaled in relief. No immediate sign of the council or enforcers wearing human shapes. They ordered coffee and a couple of simple meals, partly to support their ruse and partly because they needed real nutrition. Evelyn discreetly surveyed the surroundings, eyes flicking to the corner where an ancient computer kiosk stood, a public terminal set up for travelers. Once the waitress was out of earshot, Jason leaned in. "I'll use that terminal. Keep an eye on anyone who might be watching. If you see anything suspicious, let me know." Evelyn nodded, her posture guarded. "Be quick, and remember, if you see any sign of a drone or anomalies on the screen, log off immediately." Jason made his way over to the kiosk, relieved to find it unoccupied. The ancient computer whirred to life with an asthmatic hum, a battered keyboard missing its Q key. He typed in a short summary of the ledger's coordinates, cross-referencing them on a map. The internet connection was painfully slow. He glanced over his shoulder. Evelyn was watching him calmly, sipping her coffee with feigned casualness. No one else seemed to pay him much attention. After interminable loading times, a set of global map points popped up. Jason jotted them in a small notebook. One site near the southwestern desert, another across the Atlantic on a remote island, another deep in polar regions, and several scattered across continents. Each corresponded with notations from the ledger, referencing artifacts or protection nodes. The pattern implied a global web of hidden technology, possibly stasis pods or advanced devices, designed to keep the Council's monitoring at bay. He was about to close out when he noticed a faint flicker on the corner of the screen, like digital interference. His stomach lurched. Could that be the Council tapping in? Quickly, he cleared the history, shut down the terminal, and hustled back to the booth. Got them, he muttered under his breath, sliding onto the seat. But I think the system might have been probed. Not sure. Evelyn's eyes narrowed. Time to go. She stood, tossing enough bills on the table to cover their meal. The waitress looked mildly confused at their abrupt departure, but they didn't linger long enough for questions. Outside, the midday sun glinted off the truck's windshield. Jason started the engine, scanning the street for any sign of suspicious vehicles. None stood out, just a lone pickup hauling lumber and a sedan from the local sheriff's department parked by the diner. But that subtle tension in Jason's gut refused to fade. They drove back toward the forest in uneasy silence. Only when they were halfway along the winding road did Evelyn speak. Those coordinates, did they show any pattern or mention a prime location for the next artifact? Her voice carried a note of urgency, an undercurrent of hope. Jason nodded, tapping the notebook on the dashboard. There's one spot about 5 hours from here, in the southwestern desert. Grandpa wrote something about an underground chamber in an old mine. If we can reach it without drawing attention, we might find exactly what we need to boost our defenses or even learn how to contact your people. Evelyn's gaze turned resolute, the lines of pain and exhaustion still present but overshadowed by resolve. Then that's our next destination. The Council won't stop hunting, but if we keep moving from site to site, gathering each piece of your grandfather's plan, we stand a chance. Perhaps not just for ourselves, but for other worlds under the Council's shadow. Jason pressed the gas pedal, feeling a cautious thread of determination stir within him. The battered truck rumbled forward, carrying them deeper into unknown territory. Yet for the first time since discovering Evelyn in that hidden basement chamber, he sensed a glimmer of direction. If they could piece together the professor's puzzle, maybe they could rewrite Earth's fate and the fate of countless others. Beyond the stars, they disappeared into the winding roads, leaving only swirling dust in the faint echo of a diner door clanging shut behind them, as the world they'd known receded and an unimaginable new journey began. Looking back, this journey has evolved into something far greater than any of us imagined. From unearthing a mysterious alien pod in a dusty basement to standing at the brink of a possible interplanetary showdown, our heroes have proven that courage, trust, and a bit of creative thinking can triumph over seemingly impossible odds. Through every perilous turn, they've forged alliances, uncovered advanced technologies, and learned that humanity's curiosity is its greatest strength. In saving one another, they've made strides to safeguard an entire world, and possibly inspired other distant planets to fight for their own freedom. Their story reminds us that unity and hope can outshine fear, even when the challenge seems insurmountable. What do you think? Share your thoughts, theories, and any questions you have in the comments below. We'd love to keep the discussion going. Thank you for reading, and remember to subscribe if you enjoyed this story. There are more adventures just around the corner.